Hi, I'm Dan Fager with GI Jobs, and welcome to our Success After Service series. Today we're talking with Tyrone Hewitt, a Navy veteran who now helps safe service members make a smooth transition to civilian life. Tyrone is a transition and employment counselor at the Fleet and Family Support Center in Chesapeake, Virginia. Welcome, Tyrone.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time. So let's just talk a little bit about your own military service before we get into what you do today. When and why did you enlist?
Oh, now, that's a good question. So I enlisted about a year after high school, right? I had kind of a typical job working at a deli and a grocery store. And it kind of dawned upon me that I really wasn't doing much. The idea of going to college wasn't happening. And I actually happened to speak to a Navy vet, not a Navy veteran, an Army veteran and an Air Force veteran. They asked me what I like to do. And I said, well, I like to work on things, and I actually love to work on aircraft. And they said, you know what, you should talk to the Navy recruiters and the Air Force recruiters. And we actually had a Navy recruiter I used to come through every week to get his deli lunch. So I went to his office, spoke to him, and probably 30 days after I spoke to him, I was on a plane to Great Lakes.
Wow. Where did you grow up?
Well, you know what? My dad was in the Army, so I lived everywhere: Texas, Kansas, Germany, Louisiana. So Army brat, and then went the Navy route.
Yeah, so you were preconditioned to the military life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. So what were some of your jobs in the Navy, and what were some of your duty stations?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So my main job was an aviation electrician. I worked mainly on helicopters. Did a little bit instructor tour time and on jets. My first duty station was in North Island, California, so out in Coronado. Went after I did my 5 years there, I went to Florida, back to school for about 9 months, and then headed out to Virginia and went back and forth between Naval Air Station, Oceana, and Norfolk for the rest of those, 14 or so years. Actually, no, and then I went back to Oceana, retired. Almost forgot about that.
Yeah, trying to roll it all into 20 years into like
yeah.
A little nutshell. It's crazy. Well, did you go to school while you were in the Navy at all?
I did. You know what? So that's an interesting question. So when I was in Florida, I wanted to stay in Florida. And when I spoke to the detailer when I was coming to the end of my time at school, the individual said, "Hey, I have Virginia for you." And I'm like, I'm not really trying to go to Virginia. I want to stay in Florida. And he said, well, I tell you what, I have a good set of orders, and they always say that. I'll give you a day to think about it. So I actually spoke to some of my instructors, and every one of them said, you know what, that's a really good set of orders. And it was an opportunity for me to kind of settle down for 3 years, right? The previous tour I did multiple deployments, 3 deployments in like 4.5 years. And when I got to my new duty station in Oceana, I was probably there 2 weeks, and I was talking to a colleague of mine, and he asked me if I thought about college, and I said, nah, maybe. And he kind of spoke to me about it. I said, well, maybe I'll do it in the summer. He said, I'm going to tell you what, you need to, and he was serious. He's like, you need to go to the office today, talk to different counselors, figure out what school and programs you want to do, and do it now. Because if you don't, you're going to keep saying, I'm going to school this summer, and then it's spring, and then 3 years are going to go by. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have gone. So I finished a bachelor's degree shortly after I left there, and then a master's degree later. But I don't think if it was for that single conversation, I probably would have kept saying next year.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing what impact people can have on your lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you approached retirement, what was your exit plan?
My exit plan was to utilize the degree that I had. So I had a bachelor's degree in sociology, a master's degree in human services. And I knew I wanted to help people. But as I started to explore a little bit more, that's a big pot, right? You can help people with disabilities. You can help people who are low income. You can help people who are looking for employment. You can be an academic advisor. So I started talking to different people, trying to get an idea of what they did. And I looked at the volunteer work that I had done over the last 10 years and kind of decided that my exit plan was to use my degree, network with individuals, and get into the role that I'm actually in right now.
Gotcha. Did you do any counseling while you were in the Navy? You mentioned volunteer work, but was that part of your any of your billets or anything?
I was a financial counselor, but I think as you kind of go up in rank, that's just one of your of your roles as a leader. You're counseling people on both their personal and professional lives, right? You may have somebody who's brand new out of high school, maybe somebody who's in a couple of years trying to figure out their way. So I would say I did a lot of personal and professional counseling, a lot of education counseling. Those I would say probably last 15 years.
Okay. So you got on in 2018, is that right?
2018, correct. Yep.
Mm-hmm. And tell us about how you got your first civilian job.
Yeah, good question. So I actually happened to be in TAP class. I went twice. And the first time I went to TAP class, I was talking to one of the TAP facilitators, or one of the transition facilitators, and she asked me about my educational background, what I had done in the Navy, and what I want to pursue. And after I gave her all my answers, she followed up with, I think you'd probably enjoy being a transition counselor. So I showed her my resume. We spoke a little bit. There were some other individuals I knew in the area who had been working with fleeing families. So I contacted all of those individuals just to kind of get an idea of what the organization's like in different roles. And then it was kind of, hey, this is the individual who's doing an interview or interviewing. Shoot them an email, tell them I sent them your way. And, we maintained contact and eventually applied.
Wow. So you went from taking TAP to teaching TAP.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you look at that. And I think I had some advantages there because, I didn't work for an organization, but I volunteered with an organization called Jobs for Life. And one of their roles is to help individuals maybe coming out of prison or low-income situations to navigate their employment. So I had some experience there. I think my degree helped me out. But I would tell you that it's there, and then I kind of used my own lessons learned, but it was a learning curve because, you go from transitioning to helping people transition. So there was I still do it, a lot of reading, a lot of research, trying to get the ins and outs. That way I'm, providing the person with the best service. Yeah.
So I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, I was cyber stalking you, that your why. Tell us about your why that you have on LinkedIn.
Yeah, you know what? Absolutely. So the year I retired, so everybody knows, most of your VA medical centers within that area, most of them, if not all of them, throughout the years, they have what they call veteran homeless stand downs. And what they do is they allow the population to come in and volunteer along with their clinical counselors and a group of social services. So it could be individuals helping with claims, housing, jobs. This particular one does quick health assessments, flu shots. I mean, it's a gambit of services for service members or veterans and families who are either on the brink of homelessness or are already homeless, right? So I volunteered at my first one, November 2018. And during one of the breaks, I ran into an individual I was stationed with in like 2005, 2006. And it really blew my mind because this individual, people are homeless for a number of reasons. But when I look back to this individual, there were no triggers. There wasn't anything that made me say, wow, I'm not shocked, right? He had a technical background, which made him, employable. And it just made me realize that anybody can go into a situation where one event happens and they become homeless. So I treat transition like that. I'm trying to help people understand their finance, all the available resources and support services. That way, a person doesn't eventually become homeless.
Yeah. The old saying, there for but the grace of God to go I, right?
Yep. Yeah, right.
Well, tell us a little bit now about what you're doing today, who you work for, what you do, where you do it.
Yep, absolutely. So, like you stated earlier, I work with Fleeing Family Support Center. So most of, if not all the services have a support center. They provide a number of services. It could be clinical counseling, assistance for people with, exceptional family member programs, finances. I work mainly in the transition portion and spouse employment or family employment. So I don't teach TAP anymore. I taught it for several years virtually when we were in COVID. But now I assist service members who are maybe before they go to TAP or right afterwards, kind of help them navigate that area, look for work, help them tailor their resumes, maybe really help them strategize the job search, because some people, they like to apply online and then wait, but help them understand how to strategize a job search, prepare for interviews, right? We also have a portion of the TAP program that's called a capstone, where it's that final conversation, helping them understand really if they're on the right track, how to get them on the right track. And then, like I said, with spouses, helping spouses also with their employment search and all the other benefits that they may not be aware of, to help them, find successful employment.
Mm-hmm. So it's more one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do teach classes, but most of the work I do is one-on-one.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Well, I noticed in looking at your LinkedIn profile that you have almost 35,000 followers.
Yeah.
That's not one-on-one. That's pretty impressive. So obviously you're doing something right. What's your secret sauce with the LinkedIn?
So, that's good. I think so. And I actually had this conversation with somebody at a career summit that we had in Norfolk. What I've realized after talking to so many people is that people generally have the same questions, and they're not always aware of all the information and resources. I haven't quite figured out this information vacuum, but what I realized with social media, because social media is such a strong tool, is that if I'm able to share information that people may have heard but forgot, maybe heard but misunderstood, maybe never heard about it, I'll share it on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is my primary tool. I use Facebook also, but what I've realized is that everybody knows a veteran or a military spouse. It could be a grandparent, and I don't just do transition stuff. I do a lot of veteran information too, because there's so many different stages in the veteran life cycle. But what I've realized is that hopefully I'm sharing information that somebody can use, maybe a coworker. I have people that contact me. They'll say, hey, my son, my daughter, my brother, my grandfather, my neighbor, and they have very specific questions. And I'll through the messaging system say, here's a resource. Or if they have really big concerns, have them shoot me a phone call. So I think the information that I share on a consistent basis allows people to say, hey, here's a person who shares pretty reliable, accurate, and up-to-date information.
So is LinkedIn the social media channel you would recommend for, I guess, not just even transitioning service members, but veterans who have been out a while?
Yeah, absolutely. I like to say that LinkedIn has a really good veteran support system. And sometimes when we speak to individuals, we realize that, the veteran population is so huge. You could have somebody who may have come in 79 and they got out in 83, but they're still a veteran. They still went through some challenges, or they still had some information, right? So that support group is so large in so many different areas, where there are people who are willing to share information or connect one to another person or share a personal story that can help our either current transitioning service members, families, or somebody else who may already be out and struggling.
Yeah. So given that, what's your best advice for transitioners or veterans when it comes to LinkedIn?
I would say don't be shy, interact with other individuals, ask questions through the threads. I don't think there is, we often say this, there's no such thing as a stupid question, because if you don't know, you don't know. In reality, things change. So just that that positive interaction with other individuals. Hey, can you tell me your story? Do you know of a resource? Do you know of a person? I can name dozens of veterans that will take the time to answer a question in a comment or a DM or take a phone call. Right. So I think it's that being proactive.
Mm-hmm. What about the content, like the things you post? Is it a good idea to, get political or negative, or be posting keg stand photos from a couple of years ago, anything like that?
So, no, that's good. So I would definitely stay away from. I would stay away from anything that causes negative conversations at the workplace. We all know those topics, right? And here's the deal: some people may mean well, but it's the perspective of the conversation or the individual who's on the receiving end, right? And social media makes it really easy for people just to say whatever they want in the comments block, right? I would absolutely stay away from being negative. I know of people who and I can think of a few who have been negative on, and not just once, not, hey, I'm having a bad day, I want to vent, like continued daily, if not weekly, or weekly, if not daily, just negative information. And then they may say, I'm having issues maybe finding a job or whatever the case may be. I reach out to a person, they didn't help me. And it's my assumption that if they're, being that negative on social media, that they're coming across negative in their personal lives. And, nobody likes bad energy, right? It's kind of like, let me stay away from the negative energy. And that's why people are maybe less likely to help another person or distance themselves from a person. As far as pictures, even I kind of play around with different pictures. Sometimes I just bring pictures to bring awareness to certain things. But I have found that with social media and LinkedIn is sometimes a picture allows other individuals to relate to a certain situation. Like I posted a picture in a uniform. It was a float coat from like 2 or 3 days ago from probably 7 years ago. I knew sailors, especially sailors in aviation, were going to relate to that. So that may cause them to open up the thread and say, what is he talking about? Or maybe somebody who's like, why is he posting this picture? What's he going to talk about now? So every once in a while I would say absolutely, but I'm not sure if I would do it on a continual basis.
Mm-hmm. Good advice. Tell us about your tagline. You better call Tyrone for some great transition counseling.
Yeah. So, that was a song, man, that was a song that was out long before I even joined the Navy. You better call Tyrone. And then people kind of start to say it. And for years, I was kind of hesitant on adding that to a tagline because I try to remain, it's kind of hard to believe, but I'm actually an introvert. I'm probably an extroverted introvert, if that even makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I was kind of hesitant of doing a tagline because I didn't want to make it seem like I was making everything about myself or I was being arrogant. But, as more people kind of said it, I was like, you know what, maybe it's a brand, right? Because people will say you need to make your brand. So I was like, okay, I'll make that my brand, I suppose. And if anybody wants to reach out, they know, hey, you better call Tyrone. And I'll get a lot of messages. They may say, hey, I didn't want to call, but let me shoot you a message about some VA benefits. And I'm like, here's the answer. And for those who are listening, if I haven't gotten back to you, I'm not ignoring you. It's that sometimes I kind of get lost in those messages.
I'll bet 35,000 followers. That's a lot of people. What advice do you have just in general for someone who might be getting ready to start their own transition from the military, a year out or a couple of years out, that might be helpful? The things that you wish you knew before you got out.
Absolutely, that's good. I would say, and it's easy to say to kind of be aware about your resources, but there are so many resources, GI Jobs, so many magazines and books and web pages. Take the time to read that stuff. There's so much stuff out there that's information saturated, right? And you don't know what you don't know until you read it or you hear about it. If it's great for you, it's great. You may have more questions to ask about it. But what I find is that a lot of people aren't fully aware of all the programs and the resources and the people and the opportunities out there. And they kind of go through the program or their transition, I guess, kind of blind and limited on what they're capable of doing. And unfortunately, in some of these cases, some of it's time limited. You may only have an open window to utilize something, and then the time passes and you're like, oh man, I wish I would have known about this last year because I would have applied for the program or I would have done this. But I would say just really educate yourself on it. And it sounds crazy, but everything. There are books and magazines and podcasts and LinkedIn posts, right? We probably spend who knows how much time watching TikTok videos on our phone, when in all honesty, that 5 or 10 minutes can really educate you to have what I would call a successful transition. And to be honest, I'm not even sure what the definition of successful transition really is, because it's kind of different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't talk about?
No, I would like to thank you for having me. If anybody's watching this or listening, definitely feel free to reach out to me. If you have questions, I'll try to answer it. If I don't have a question or an answer, I'll try to connect you with somebody. But the veteran population is a lot larger than we assume, right?
Mhm.
And we all know what we're going through. We all been through it, or we know somebody's gone through it. And I think our main goal at the end is to prevent, homelessness and suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tyrone, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for what you do for service members, for veterans, and happy Veterans Day.
Awesome. Thanks.